The limits and shortcomings of the protectionist era under the Fianna Fáil government of the 1930s to the 1950s would unfortunately be seen again with Lemass's visions and expectations for a post-50s modern Ireland, thriving on foreign direct investment from American and other companies, providing jobs and economic prosperity. Though the country had some degrees of success in the decades that followed, with the production of goods and services, the economy, it seemed, just couldn't boom on exports or domestic spending and consumption alone. The nature of capitalism and international finance was ever-changing throughout the 20th century, and what appeared to be the problem? Outside forces that Ireland was grappling to keep up with, and that of its leaders, as were many countries. A genuine spike in real investment did begin to occur, however. In the early 1990s, the Eurozone was indeed a factor. However, the inflow of money was taking advantage of existing government policy, such as transfer pricing rules, treasury management operations, and other forms of tax incentive, essentially where foreign firms were moving goods through their Irish operations to take advantage of low tax rate. This, as a consequence, created the illusion of growth and development. By the end of the 90s, real growth was overtaken and squeezed out by the economics of the Celtic Tiger bubble. The Celtic Tiger essentially had two phases between 1993 and 2000. It was a genuine and healthy export-led boom, but beyond 2000 until the crash in 2008 was artificially inflated, as well known, driven by banking and construction. A fatal flaw dyed in the wool of the Irish economy, ever since the 1950s, has been the over-reliance and development in the areas of construction and finance, and although others make up the economy, such as foreign pharmaceutical and electronics companies, have become the ones most relied upon to prop up the economy. Although domestic industries in such areas as food production have existed for decades in Ireland, the neoliberal model of the establishment seems to blatantly bypass the need for a domestic industry policy, and have relied upon foreign companies to provide variety in industry and employment, such as technology, heavy engineering, and manufacturing. Even while Ireland has always had strong ties to food and agricultural production, it has gradually seen the erosion of these areas under EU rules and regulations. Some historic and notable examples being the eradication of the Irish sugar industry in recent years, EU farming subsidies to perturb and stop farmers from producing to full capacity, with what they do produce largely going to export. Perhaps the worst of all has been the exploitation of Ireland's fishing waters, again by the EU. Returning to the issue of the historical over-reliance by the Irish establishment on the domestic banking and construction sectors, having led to disastrous consequences socio-economically, most notably during the Celtic Tiger era, but still remaining an issue to this day, in 2024, sees Ireland in a perpetual housing crisis, due to current policies by government reducing social housing to a minimum, while allowing private vulture funds to buy up vast amounts of housing stock, who then sell back to the government or through the housing market. Much of this is due to the aftermath of the collapse in 2008 and the establishment of NOMA, to be looked at shortly. Ireland, much like the rest of the world, is influenced by the factors of cheap labour and strong open global economies in order to remain viable economically, even more so being a small country. During the Celtic Tiger era, the country saw a massive influx of foreign labour to fuel the housing boom, as well as cheap money borrowed from international banks, that was then borrowed from domestic banks by developers and house buyers, with the bubble eventually bursting as wages and house prices reached a peak. This resulted in a shrinking of the labour pool in the construction sector, alongside the collapse in the housing market and failing of the banking sector. Similar factors of expansion and contraction remain a reality, although perhaps to play out in different circumstances now and for the future. Wages cannot keep rising without being affected by inflation, and whatever areas of activity that affect society will eventually reach a peak and contract gradually, or come crashing down, be it a housing or tech bubble. The idea remains the same. Such common sense one would think the Irish establishment remain vigilant of, but their actions remain contrary. Domestic industry, by and large, for small to medium businesses, remain the least supported. Such areas as tourism and the restaurant sectors regularly suffer and decline. The COVID era created severe damage to the hospitality and tourist sectors, many of which did not recover from. The current asylum situation, that has been ongoing since 2021, has put these sectors in the crosshairs once again, with a number of hotel and accommodation owners making arguably bad ethical choices, taking government grants to house Middle Eastern and African men, posing as asylum seekers when really economic migrants, as is happening across Europe, America, and the UK. Arguably coincidence, arguably a manufactured crisis, will be returned to later for further examination. Homegrown employers, though relatively strong in terms of economy size, are still dwarfed by many much larger foreign companies, being the largest employers in finance, technology, and manufacturing in the country. This underutilization of domestic industry and overcompensation and reliance on foreign direct investment has resulted in Ireland having an overly inflated GDP. An overly inflated GDP is a clear sign of a tax haven country, due to the enormous amounts of capital flowing into or through the country, doing little to stimulate real economy, apart from the financial sector, such as banking, investing, taxes, accountancy, and so on, with the sector dwarfing all other areas of real economy. In the aftermath of the global financial crisis of 2008 and Celtic Tiger collapse, the Irish government, rather than shift to a more democratic form of economic planning, leaned heavier into tax evasion as a means to recover the economy. In 2009, the then Fianna Fáil government posted to austerity budgets, but quietly convened a commission on taxation made up of banking and consultant circles to try find ways to bring capital back into the crashed economy. They gave the government two ideas. First was to issue capital allowance for intangible assets, which since has placed Ireland as the foremost tax haven for intellectual property in the world. Secondly, to adjust the crown jewel of the Section 110 special purpose vehicle to allow foreign capital as a way to power a recovery in the domestic property sector. Collectively, these have made Ireland into one of the biggest tax havens on the planet.